The South African Cabin Crew Association has raised concerns over South African Airways failing to announce rooting out corruption as part of their radical restructuring process. This after Public Enterprises Minister Pravin Gordhan announced that the process will help ensure that the national carrier's financial and operational sustainability. He says that last month's strike by members affiliated to NUMSA and SAA has caused immense damage to the reputation, operations and finances of South African Airways. SAA President Zazi Nsibanyoni Mugambi says that SAA needs to commit towards a non-corrupt leadership. So, radical restructuring at SAA is the language being used by the Public Enterprises Department. So what might that restructuring look like to save the national carrier from bankruptcy? Aviation Analyst Desmond Latham joins me now to talk through some of these critical issues at SAA. Desmond, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Always good to have you on the programme.
Thanks, Peter. Good to see you.
Right, radical restructure. And I think perhaps the language might be offending some people, but that's pretty much what's required to fix the mess that SAA is in.
Yeah, something like radical economic transformation. Yeah. As soon as you hear the word radical, let's start with reasonable. The reasonable analysis is that SAA is verging on bankruptcy because of the numbers, and significant action has to be taken. There are three scenarios. The first is that SAA is allowed to nosedive and all the workers lose their jobs. South Africa loses a wonderful principal and an old business. The second is that they are bailed out by government with the $2.5 billion that SAA has asked for, the board. And the third is that it's sold. So it's increasingly likely at the moment that the third option is going to be taken by South African Airways. If you look at all the analysts, if you look at all the comments that have been made, and if you look at business reason, it seems that part of SAA will be hived off, air chefs, for example, which are part of the group. Mango may move away in its own, but it looks like SAA will need to be ring-fenced, and then the debt will be sold. The debt in SAA is now approaching 29 billion rand. Since we last spoke, it's gone up by 1 billion.
Would somebody buy the entity with the debt, so they'd have to pay off the creditors, and then they'd get the company with all these assets perhaps for 1 rand?
Well, what you're going to look at is international marketplace. South Africa has a really strong, and South African Airways has a really strong business model. Its CapEx has over 60 planes, for example, leased planes and owned planes, and that's Airbuses, the latest Airbuses. That's a large amount of CapEx. That's collateral on any kind of future deal. It has a number of highly skilled pilots and air crew and cabin crew and ground crew. So these are valuable individuals that are part of this chain.
So what would the new owner be able to do that the management at SAA have failed to do?
Well, I think first of all, they'll look at the number of managers. There are 479 managers to manage fewer than 5,000 workers. Something has gone seriously wrong in a business that's doing that. Right out front, that's 1 per every 10. That's not a sustainable business model on an enterprise such as South African Airways. So at the moment, the 189A letters have gone out, apparently to around 95 managers. That'll save them hundreds of millions in the first quarter at least. Then I'm afraid it also means over 800 workers will also be retrenched. And they have not received the letters yet. But the reality is that South African Airways has to move now. And the board is not moving quickly enough. The board has blamed the shareholder and the shareholder's government. And government has given them 21 CEOs in 10 years. Wow. And you cannot run anything with a CEO pitching up every 6 months, which is technically what that number means. You can't manage a principal to do that. So I think that we need we've got huge latency skills in South African Airways. It's a massive enterprise that accounts for 0.2% of our GDP, for example, the value of the airline. So there's a lot of principles here that show that going forward, we can probably ring fence the debt. Someone will have to take over the debt, but look in dollars. It's 1 to 14, 1 to 15. So do the subtraction on 28 billion, and we're looking at a few $1 billion, which can be then worked over a period of time.
All right, so the unions are saying, look, how dare you say that our strike has added to the woes of the airline. But the way it looks, as much as they talk about corruption and they talk about the procurement process, Is it possible to turn this airline around without job losses?
Impossible. It's impossible. I mean, if you look at the earning potential of the airline, you cannot protect jobs just for the sake of protecting jobs. That's a Trotskyite logic that comes from the 80s. Remember, SAA was started during the apartheid era. I mean, it's an unsustainable old idea, if you look at it. It needs a new idea. So radical maybe, as we started with the conversation, radical may be the word, but I think all you've got to look at is the principle of operations. Look at how many managers it's got, and then work with the workforce there. There's a latent and a legacy of productivity on both sides, management and workers. The workers, of course, have not read the writing on the wall for whatever political reason. NUMSA, as we know, will do this if they feel like it. At Eskom, they're doing the same thing at Eskom.
So has the SAA project been a vanity project by and large by the South African government?
You can argue that with some of the external routes, such as to Beijing, for example, which has lost us a lot of money as a country. It was funded incorrectly, instead of just going to Hong Kong and allowing people to fly from there. That was a vanity project under the BRICS aegis during President Zuma's era. It was very much a fop to the Chinese, and that was a mistake. So you can say that, but apart from that, government, business, and people in the street use the airline internationally to fly to our shores and away from our shores. We fly to 8 countries in the world. And it doesn't sound like a lot, but it is a lot when you look at our competitors. So I think SAA is savable. I think that the management needs to be changed immediately, and that the shareholder, the government, needs to understand that the game is over. It's no more footing around here saying that, okay, we can buy another 2 quarters of our position politically and so on.
Yeah, so
the money is gone.
So, you know, we hear about the institution of things, a job such as the restructuring officer in these SOEs. What would that person do at SAA?
Well, there has been corruption. There's been a lot of corruption. Under Dudimieni, a vast amount, which has been proven, and in future court cases will come out. And NUMSA and the other unions are completely correct to point the finger at accountability here, because there has been sustained misuse of public funds, both from the PIC, which is Government Employee Pension Fund money, which has been taken and funded an element inside these operations, which is not sustainable. So there's no question about it that they put their finger on something that is deeply perturbing to us as South Africans, that there's a non-accountability on this. And if it's dealt with, you see, that's the future. We can fix it.
All right, so perhaps as a final question, so aviation generally on the continent seems to be on an upward sort of momentum, but then I read Kenya Airways and they're begging for the government to buy back its shares, saying that the playing field is not level. We see Uganda Airways relaunching its national carrier, and yet we are looking towards going the opposite direction.
But we're at the bottom end of Africa. They're not. Kenya has had some serious misjudgments made in their investments into the airplanes, for a start. And secondly, they have terrorism. They've got Muslim extremism in the north of their country, and it's damaged their tourism industry. We don't have that problem so far. So they have a particular need, Kenyan Airlines, to fix some of the problems that they have that is different from us. Ethiopian Airlines is the odd person out here, which is not seeking the same thing. Now, Uganda is a very, very small country. It's the size of Natal, KZN. You know, it's a really small territory, and it needs to, it's boxing above its weight at the moment when it comes to aviation. Ethiopia is far bigger than South Africa in terms of population, and its GDP is growing at 8%. Our GDP is not. Our GDP is growing less than 0.5%. So how can we create profits from the airline industry going forward to the new year, by the way, which is when workers will be paid the back pay that they were promised, the 5.9% they've got, starts in March. If government said at the time, and they say, if they're making a profit. Now, I don't know who's waved the magic wand between now, which is the beginning of December, and March, to create this sudden flow of cash. The tourist change that we have coming this quarter will not fund that turnaround. If you look at the basic numbers, R500 million is required to run SAA. It's not making that. How's it going to mysteriously provide for that? So we have a significant, difficult period approaching. However, you've mentioned Uganda for a reason, and Kenya. They have their own set, I'm just pointing out, they have their own set of issues that we don't have, thankfully. So we're still able to attract tourists to our region. We have infrastructure, and that's one of our biggest money earners in terms of economy. So that's the shining light, I think, in the future.
Okay. Desmond Latham, always a pleasure talking to you. We'll leave it there for the time being, but I have a feeling a lot more conversations are going to be had over the next few months. Thanks so much indeed for your insights this day.
Thanks for having me.